1992, Russian scientists released a secret paper claiming the Earth is a living organism, generating energy fields in its deepest faults. Their biggest discovery: they created plasma in a lab that lasted seconds, defying the laws of physics and finally providing a plausible explanation for mysterious lights in the sky.
Okay, let's just dive right in. What if the biggest aerial mystery we grapple with? UAPs, UFOs, those silent objects that just maneuver impossibly. What if they weren't visitors from out there?
What if they're coming from down here?
Exactly. What if they're a physical product, a manifestation of a system that's far older, way more powerful, and literally right under our feet?
It's the Earth. It sounds crazy at first, I know. But we're talking about these huge, physics-bending spheres of energy generated by rock-grinding tectonic stress deep underground.
And then vented up through specific spots.
Through geological hotspots, like chimneys for planetary energy.
Okay, that is the truly mind-bending idea we're digging into today. We need you to sort of set aside the usual narratives for a bit.
Yeah, put the little green man on hold.
Right. We're extracting the core argument from this, really seminal work of Russian geophysics. It's a group of scientists who didn't just speculate, they meticulously cataloged sightings and then scientifically modeled how our own planet can create these long-lasting maneuvering balls of, get this, cold plasma.
Cold plasma. And that's key, because these cold plasma balls look exactly like the weird lights and objects people report seeing all over the globe.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to really move past the spooky mystery and get into the nuts and bolts of the science.
We're basically giving you the blueprint for this planetary energy grid idea. We're going to explain, as simply as we can, how this perfect storm of underground pressure and, believe it or not, atmospheric moisture.
We'll get to that. How that combination creates these just astonishing temporary objects that seem to defy everything we think we know.
Okay, let's unpack it. But fair warning, our journey starts not with looking up at the stars, but by completely rethinking the ground beneath our feet.
All right, part one, the Earth as this complex, energized organism. That sounds a bit out there.
It does, initially. But the foundational concept here is what they call the organismic model of Earth. And it's a scientific framework, not just, a metaphor. It asks you to stop seeing our world as just this static, inert ball of rock floating around.
So it's more than just geology and weather systems operating independently.
Much more. It's this radical idea, really, that the planet is dynamic, it's responsive, it's complexly organized.
Yeah.
They literally describe it as an element of a complexly organized, self-sustaining solar system.
Okay, self-sustaining. Like Gaia theory, but maybe with more physics?
Kind of, yeah, but grounded in measurable geophysics. It's about recognizing that all the Earth's big processes, geological, atmospheric, electromagnetic aboard, they're not separate. They're interwoven.
Like internal organs working together.
Exactly, like massive interdependent systems. And its long-term evolution, they argue, isn't just internal. It's deeply embedded, that's their word, in the evolution of the whole solar system. There's this constant back and forth, direct and inverse feedback.
Okay, so things happening out there affect down here and vice versa. So the Earth spinning, the core churning, the plates grinding, that's not just its own little show.
Nope. It's constantly reacting to the solar wind, to cosmic rays, even the gravitational tug of Jupiter. It's this huge dynamic dance that dictates where the planet's energy flows, how it builds up, how it releases.
Which brings us right back to the weird stuff, the anomalies.
Right. Because if the Earth is this, complex, self-regulating thing, why do people consistently report seeing these really bizarre, non-periodic, super energetic, plasma-like things that just don't fit neatly into conventional physics or meteorology?
That's the classic UAP problem in a nutshell, isn't it? And what these Russian authors really hammer home is the lack of serious, coordinated study. Precisely because these things are unpredictable, they just get shoved into this box labeled anomalous phenomena of nature.
And that dismissal is a big problem scientifically. It carries a lot of baggage. It means credible eyewitness accounts, actual observational data often gets just sidelined or worse, painted with this mystical coloring, as they put it.
But these scientists are saying, hang on a second.
Exactly. They're saying, look, we're geophysicists. We measure geological stress for a living. And we're seeing events that require enormous, highly concentrated energy to even exist. We can't just ignore them because the observations are inconvenient or strange.
So the million-dollar question, or maybe billion-watt question is, where is the planet getting the colossal energy needed to make these things, these physics-defying events?
Well, according to this model, It's not solar flares directly hitting the air, and it's definitely not alien hyperdrives.
It's coming from the ground.
It's coming from the ground, deep, deep underground.
Okay, so if the energy is terrestrial, we need a new kind of map, right? Not political boundaries, but energy maps.
That's exactly it. Forget continents and countries for a second. We need to look for the planet's pressure points, the sort of exposed terminals of this giant planetary battery. They actually call these specific locations energy active zones, or EAZs.
Oh, EAZs. Okay, what defines an EAZ?
They're very specific geological areas, and their defining characteristic is an extremely high vertical energy transfer. Think of them in like the Earth's most sensitive spots. It's windows, they say, in this constant interaction it has with the cosmic environment around it.
So energy is just pouring upwards through the zone.
Constantly cycling massive amounts of energy up from the lithosphere, the crust, and upper mantle into the atmosphere, and sometimes, they argue, even into near space.
What makes a random spot on Earth an EAZ? You mentioned stress before. Is it about fault lines?
Bingo. It brings us to the tectonic trigger. Every single EAZ they identified is intimately linked to deep, reactivating faults and complex tectonophysical environments surrounding them.
Reactivating, meaning old fault lines coming back to life.
Yeah, or just persistently active ones. And these aren't just little surface cracks. We're talking colossal fractures. Some might penetrate through the entire Earth's crust. They act like high-speed highways for energy and also for mass transfer like fluids and gases coming up from the deep crust and even the mantle.
Okay, so the continuous grinding, the shifting along these massive fault zones, that's where the energy gets concentrated.
That's the engine. That relentless mechanical action creates the insane energy concentration needed to drive everything else we're going to talk about.
Right, but here's the leap I'm still trying to make. How does mechanical stress, literally rock grinding against rock, turn into electrical energy? Enough electrical energy to make a glowing ball hang in the sky.
Okay, that is the absolute core mechanism. Call it lithospheric electrogenesis. Fancy term for electricity generation from the solid Earth.
Lithoelectrogenesis. Got it.
And this is where that amazing phrase comes in, coined by a researcher named A. Vorby, underground thunderstorms.
Underground thunderstorms. That paints quite a picture. Okay, break that down for us. How does rock make lightning, essentially?
It's actually several well-known physical mechanisms working together on a massive scale. First, you've got piezoelectricity. You probably heard of this.
Yeah, like in watches. Squeezing crystals makes a charge.
Exactly. Many rocks, especially crystalline ones like quartz, which is super common in the crust, generate an electric charge when you put them under mechanical stress. When you squeeze them, now imagine tectonic plates grinding, squeezing trillions upon trillions of quartz crystals along hundreds of miles of a fault zone.
The scale is just mind-boggling. That would create a phenomenal amount of charge.
Phenomenal. Pressure literally equals voltage on a planetary scale. That makes intuitive sense, right?
It does, yeah. Okay, what else?
Then you have triboelectric effects. This is basically friction electricity, like rubbing a balloon on your hair.
Static electricity.
Right. When different layers of rock, or rock and fluids, rub against each other rapidly underground, especially if there's water or mineralized fluids involved, they build up static charges, big ones.
Okay, squeezing and rubbing.
And combine that with galvanoelectric conversion. This involves how electrical potentials change when fluids, often highly mineralized and conductive, move through these already electrically charged rock pathways in the fault zone. So you put it all together, the constant mechanical stress, the mass transfer from deep down, it generates these sustained, really powerful electrical fields within the Earth's crust.
So the Earth's crust itself becomes a giant complex battery, constantly being charged by tectonic movement.
That's a great way to put it. And they have evidence linking this directly to stuff we can see.
Like what? Do these underground fields affect the atmosphere?
Absolutely. Their research actually tracks the direct role these deep faults play in controlling where things like auroras appear.
Wait, the northern lights, you're saying fault lines on the ground can dictate where auroras happen way up high.
That's what their data suggests. A powerful, sustained electrical generation from the solid Earth that literally shapes the magnetosphere and ionosphere above it. The ground isn't just passively sitting there, it's actively charging the atmosphere above these EAZs.
Wow. Okay, that connection alone is huge. If we need a place to picture all this happening, you mentioned the authors focus heavily on one region, Gorny Altai.
Gorny Altai, yeah. It's in Siberia. It's basically their perfect natural laboratory, their quintessential case study, because it has everything they need.
What makes it so special?
Well, first, it's a region of just extreme tectonophysical complexity. known for incredibly deep, active fault systems. Second, it has unusually high background electromagnetic activity, you can measure it. And third, this is the crucial part, it has a staggering number of visual reports, actual documented sightings of all sorts of diverse light phenomena.
Okay, so what are people actually seeing there? Not just vague lights, I assume.
No, really specific things. Everything from localized auroras, like shimmering curtains of light just hanging over certain valleys, to distinct spherical objects, glowing strips moving across the sky, and even really weird, slow-moving lightning phenomena that don't behave like normal lightning at all.
So this area is like the planet's testing ground for these energy discharges.
Pretty much. It's where the system is most visibly active, you could say.
Now, you mentioned something earlier that really caught my attention, something that challenges the old earthquake light idea. You said these phenomena often happen in areas of lowered seismicity.
Yes. And that is super counterintuitive, isn't it?
Totally. You'd think lights would flash during or after a big quake when the energy is released.
Right. That's the conventional wisdom. But what the authors found, or suggest, is that these luminous phenomena might actually be mechanisms for stress relief, or maybe even precursors to a bigger seismic event.
So the light is the system letting off steam before the main rupture.
Kind of. Think of the EAZ, that fault zone, like a giant capacitor charging up with all that piezoelectric and triboelectric energy. When the stress builds to a critical point, even if a major earthquake hasn't happened yet, maybe the energy finds a pathway and vents outwards, upwards, as one of these luminous discharges.
And that discharge temporarily lowers the pressure in that specific spot.
Exactly. It relieves the subterranean stress locally. So the light in the sky isn't the result of the quake, it's the planet sighing, basically, under immense pressure, possibly preventing or delaying a bigger snap.
That's a brilliant concept. It completely flips the cause and effect. But okay, this raises a really interesting modern problem. What happens when we humans build our huge electrically noisy cities and infrastructure right on top of these natural energy vents?
Ah, yes. The plot thickens. That brings us to what they call technogenic hybridization. It just means the interaction between technology, our stuff, and the geology. When you build these big urban agglomerations, cities with their massive electrical power grids, generation plants, high consumption, all that technological pressure, that electrical smog, it interacts with the underlying geological stress system, the EAZ.
And I'm guessing it's not a simple interaction. Like, does our grid block the natural phenomena?
It's complicated. In some cases, yeah, maybe. The sheer density of the city's electrical activity, the background noise, might actually suppress or mask the fainter background geological anomalies. Just drown them out.
Okay, so it covers them up sometimes. But the geological energy deep down, that hasn't gone anywhere, right?
Precisely. It's still building. And instead of being suppressed, sometimes the two systems, the natural earth charge and the man-made grid, they hybridize.
They combine.
Or influence each other.
Yeah, they can combine, maybe even synchronize in some ways. Imagine the geological stress constantly generating charge deep below, and then it interacts with our high voltage lines, our power stations, maybe even big hydroelectric dams built right across active fault lines. This hybridization, they argue, can actually lead to an increase in the generation of these luminous formations in the atmosphere and near space above the city or infrastructure.
Whoa. So building a power plant near a deep fault doesn't necessarily cause the weird lights, but it might provide the final trigger. Or make the air more conductive for the discharge. It could act as an amplifier or a trigger, or change the atmospheric conditions just enough. It offers this really powerful, completely terrestrial explanation for why a lot of UAP sightings do seem concentrated near human infrastructure, military bases, power plants.
It flips the script again. It's not necessarily that they are watching our sensitive sites.
It could be that our massive power grids are actually modulating, amplifying, and making visible the natural energy discharges coming from Earth's own power grid right beneath those sites.
This is genuinely phenomenal. Okay, let's recap where we are. We have this idea of an underground power grid, the EAZs, linked to faults. They generate immense electrical energy through rock stress underground thunderstorms. That energy vents out. But we still have the biggest question. How does that raw energy stabilize? How does it form a long-lasting, maneuvering sphere of light? We're talking objects that seem to just hang there, defying known thermodynamics.
Right, we source the power. Now we absolutely need to get into the physics of the object itself. What is that glowing ball?
It has to be plasma, right? That's the fourth state of matter, super-energized gas.
It has to be plasma, yes. The object they're modeling is essentially a plasmoid, a self-contained packet of plasma. And plasma formation definitely requires that extremely high energy concentration we've been talking about, which the mechanical stress in the rock provides.
But here's the massive hurdle, the one that always trips up conventional explanations. Normal plasma, the kind we make or see in lightning, is insanely hot, thousands of degrees.
Tens of thousands even, like a welding torch or the surface of the sun.
Exactly. And it should decay, like instantly, the moment the energy source is gone. A lightning bolt vanishes in a flash. So if people are seeing a glowing sphere just hanging silently in the sky for minutes, that cannot be standard hot plasma. It would dissipate.
And this is where the research delivers its knockout punch. This is the cold plasma breakthrough, the most critical concept from this work, the explanation for the mysterious longevity, the stability of these UAP-like things and ball lightning. It's entirely down to cold, non-equilibrium plasma.
Okay, cold plasma, non-equilibrium plasma. That sounds counterintuitive. Let's do the ELI5. Explain it like I'm 5. Or maybe like I'm a slightly confused podcast host who just learned about piezoelectricity.
Okay, fair enough. Think about temperature inside the plasma, but in two different layers, sort of. In typical hot plasma, everything, the electrons, the atoms, the molecules, everything's jiggling around at the same crazy high temperature, let's say 10,000 Kelvin, whatever. It just flies apart instantly because that heat can't be contained.
Right. Everything's hot. Everything disperses.
Now, in cold, non-equilibrium plasma, it's different. The electrons, those tiny negatively charged particles that are carrying the current and defining the plasma state, they're still very hot, very energized at a high electron temperature. That keeps the plasma structure energized.
Right.
And this is the magic trick, the neutral particles, the much heavier atoms and molecules of the surrounding air that get mixed into the plasma, they are kept cold.
Wait, how can one part be super hot and the other part be not?
That's the non-equilibrium part. The different components are at vastly different temperatures. The electrons have high energy, but the bulk gas, the atoms and molecules, have low energy, meaning low temperature.
Okay. So the engine, the electrons are running hot, but the actual chassis, the body of the thing made of air molecules, stays near room temperature. How on earth do you pull off that physics trick?
This is where the lab experiments they cite are absolutely crucial. They didn't just theorize, they tried to make these things.
Mm-hmm.
And the experiments, particularly those using high-frequency HF discharge to create plasma in moist air, revealed the revolutionary secret ingredient.
Don't tell me.
Water vapor.
Humidity. The amount of moisture in the air we breathe, that's the secret sauce for making stable UFOs.
That's the bombshell finding, precisely. These experiments showed that water molecules, H2O, when present in the electrical discharge creating the plasma, act as an incredibly effective, highly localized cooling agent, specifically for the neutral gas particles.
So the water molecules literally suck the heat out of the air molecules within the plasma, like a tiny internal air conditioner.
That's a perfect analogy. They act as a heat sink. The water absorbs the excess vibrational energy from the heavier air molecules that would otherwise make the entire plasmoid heat up and explode instantly.
Okay, that's elegant. That's beautiful, actually.
It gets better. Because of this super efficient water cooling effect, the temperature of the neutral particles inside the plasmoid can be brought way, way down. They measured it minimized to around 350 Kelvin.
300 Kelvin? That's like 27 Celsius, 80 Fahrenheit. 350 K is hotter, maybe 170 F. But still, that's basically room temperature to slightly hot day temperature inside a plasma ball.
Exactly. Instead of thousands of degrees, it's cool enough to persist. But, and this is critical, that stabilization only happens. This cooling effect only works optimally when a very specific, very narrow atmospheric condition is met.
Okay. This has to be the part that explains why these things are so rare, right? You need the weather to be just right.
You absolutely do. This critical condition is all about the amount of water vapor. They quantified it with something called the optimal moisture parameter. Let's call it NP. It's the concentration of water molecules, N, divided by the total air pressure, P.
Okay, N over P. And you said the range for this parameter to work is really narrow?
Incredibly narrow. That band starts at 0.5 times 10 to the power of 20 and goes up to 3.6 times 10 to the power of 20 water molecules per cubic meter per Pascal of pressure.
Whoa. Okay, science numbers. You almost lost me there.
Well,
let's bring that back to Earth. What does that NP range actually feel like? What does it mean for the air around us?
Fair point. Let's ditch the scientific notation. When you translate that very specific NP range into normal atmospheric pressure conditions, like here at sea level, It corresponds to a relative humidity of approximately 95% to 98%.
95 to 98% relative humidity. That's not just a bit humid, that's soupy. That's like walking through fog. That's thick, steamy, just before a thunderstorm, maybe swamp air kind of humid. Wait, are we back to the swamp gas explanation?
It is extremely humid and extremely hard to hit naturally and sustain over the volume needed. This hyperspecificity, this incredibly narrow humidity window, is their elegant explanation for why natural plasmoids, whether you call them ball lightning or these UAE analogs, are so rare and seem so ephemeral.
The conditions have to be perfect.
The air needs to be so saturated that there are enough water molecules packed in there to effectively absorb the heat and stabilize the plasma structure.
But not too saturated, I guess. Like if it actually starts raining or becomes thick fog, does that destroy it?
Exactly. If the water vapor starts condensing into droplets, it probably changes the electrical properties too much, short-circuits the field, or disrupts the delicate energy balance. So the atmosphere has to be in this perfect Goldilocks zone for cold plasma.
Too dry, it just flashes and burns out like normal hot plasma. Too wet, it fizzles, or maybe never even forms properly. That narrow window, wow, that explains the rarity beautifully.
And it's not just a small effect. They found the presence of this optimal level of water vapor saturation increases the plasma's decay time, how long it lasts, by an order of magnitude, maybe more.
An order of magnitude, so 10 times longer or more.
At least. It transforms what would be just a quick, unstable spark or discharge into this weakly, non-ideal plasma structure that can actually persist, hold its shape, and move around.
Okay, I get the cooling, I get the longevity boost from the water, but stability also implies it holds its shape, right? People report spheres, rings, structured objects. Is this cold plasmoid just a random glowing cloud, or does it have some kind of internal scaffolding, something holding it together?
Great question. And yes, it absolutely seems to have structure. When these optimal humidity conditions are met in the experiments, the researchers observe something telling. The Stark effect.
What is that, simply?
It's an effect where the spectral lines of light emitted by atoms or molecules inside the plasma get split or shifted when they are exposed to a strong external electric field. But here, they were seeing it within the plasmoid itself, indicating strong internal microfields.
So there are powerful electric fields inside the ball organizing things.
Precisely. Even at the relatively low plasma densities they were dealing with, around 10,014 particles per cubic centimeter, these strong internal microfields arise. It means the plasma isn't just a uniform glowing mush. The fields are so strong they're physically organizing the atoms and molecules, slightly shifting their energy levels, creating a kind of internal framework or structure.
Like a microscopic energy skeleton inside the plasma.
That's a fantastic way to think about it. This internal microstructure, driven by the internal fields and stabilized by the water cooling, is likely what gives the plasmoid its observed stability, its often sharp edges, and its ability to maintain coherence, to hold itself together even when it moves or interacts with external forces like wind or magnetic fields.
That's the whole package then. Deep Earth generating the raw power through stressed faults. Hyperhumid air providing the perfect physical containment field via cooling, and internal electric fields providing the structure.
It connects all the dots, from geology to atmospheric science to plasma physics.
We've basically just cracked the scientific recipe for some of Earth's most mysterious and ephemeral phenomena. Okay, this is mind-blowing stuff.
We've built the theoretical engine, right?
Yeah.
Using nothing but rocks, water, and electricity, essentially. But the real astonishment, for me anyway, comes when you look at the physical evidence these things supposedly leave behind.
Yeah, how do these cold plasma packets actually behave once they're out in the world? What happens when they hit something? What kind of footprint did they leave on solid rock?
We're about to dive into the really chilling stuff, the eyewitness accounts from places like Gorny Altai, matched with the hard scientific analysis of physical traces left behind. We're talking evidence of bizarre magnetic bubbles, intense localized heat damage that just defies easy explanation. And it all seems to support this cold plasma theory.
Okay, people, if you are finding these nuggets as thrilling as we are, hold on to your hats because this is only the halfway point. We have so much more to uncover. Seriously, don't go anywhere. Now would be the perfect time. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and maybe even check out our memberships. We're here digging through these complex sources to give you the ultimate shortcut to being genuinely informed on these deep topics. And trust me, the details on the Dalnegorsk incident, the physical trace evidence, it's going to absolutely blow your mind.
All right, let's pick up the pace. Let's look at the real-world consequences when this underground power grid decides to vent.
Okay, part 4. Observed anomalies and physical traces. The Russian researchers, they didn't just stay in the lab. They went out into the field, especially in these EAZ regions like Gorny Altai, and meticulously collected descriptive accounts. Give us an example. Paint a picture of what people were actually reporting seeing there.
Okay, one really characteristic observation they detail goes something like this. A witness sees a very bright star just hanging stationary in the night sky. Suddenly, this star morphs, transforms into a moving, brilliant ball of light.
It changes shape.
Yeah, from a point source to a definite sphere. Then this object moves silently towards a specific mountain peak, in this case, Beluga Mountain, which is a known major EAZ in the Altai region.
So it heads for the EAZ.
Seems to be drawn towards it, or perhaps originating from its vicinity. Once it reaches the mountain area, it silently flashes like a brilliant pulse of light, and then it just scatters. Breaks apart into this spectacular array of multicolored sparks, and then completely vanishes.
Wow. So it's like a slow-motion firework, but silent, controlled, and ending by just dissolving into sparks.
Exactly. It suggests a highly controlled, contained energy release, not just a random explosion.
That sounds almost beautiful. But let's talk about the movement. If this is just, uncontrolled natural venting, why do these objects often appear to move with some kind of purpose? Or at least non-randomly? What did the researchers find when they cataloged the movement types?
They were very systematic about this. They broke down the reported movements.
Yeah.
While about 30%, 29.9% to be exact, was described as just straight line movement or drifting.
Okay, that could just be wind or following a simple field line?
Right. But the most distinctive characteristic, the one reported in almost half the well-observed sightings, 44.8%, was movement characterized by short segment stops. Brief, controlled hovering moments.
They stop midair.
Apparently. They also saw reports of rapid vertical movement straight up or straight down, and complex drifting patterns, not just simple straight lines.
Okay, hang on. Short stops, vertical moves, sudden changes in direction. That sounds exactly why eyewitnesses and sometimes radar operators jump to the conclusion that they're seeing an intelligently controlled craft, right?
It absolutely does. That's the core observational mystery that fuels the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
So wait a minute. If these objects are just natural plasma balls following, say, geological magnetic field lines, how do you explain maneuvers that seem to defy basic physics, like those impossible 90-degree turns or sudden stops? Doesn't that have to imply intelligence, or is there a way the EAZ model explains even that?
That is a fantastic, critical question, and the authors don't shy away from it. They propose a physical explanation that's rooted entirely in the complex structure of the EAZ itself, the underground geology.
Okay, how?
They found that when they could get really good, well-tracked trajectories of these spherical or sometimes ring-shaped formations, the paths weren't random. They were directly controlled by the underlying deep geological faults, or sometimes by highly localized sequences of alternating magnetic anomalies along those faults.
So the fault lines under the ground are like invisible rails in the sky.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. Imagine a huge fault line, maybe miles deep, snaking under the landscape. It acts like a massive, complex electrical conduit. The plasmoid, being this highly charged, probably magnetized structure itself.
Magnetic bubble thing?
Sort of, yeah. It has its own field. It gets essentially locked onto or guided by the strongest magnetic field lines emanating from that full structure below. Now, think about what happens if that fault line underground takes a sharp turn, maybe a near 90-degree bend where two fault systems intersect.
The magnetic field lines above it would also have to bend sharply, right?
Precisely. The magnetic flux lines would follow the geology. So for the plasmoid locked onto that field line way up in the atmosphere, following that sharp bend means executing what looks like an almost instantaneous, impossible turn. Or maybe hovering briefly at a point where the magnetic flux is particularly intense or complex before being pulled along the next segment of the fault line's field.
Wow. So what appears to us as a sentient, impossible maneuver is actually just the object rigidly, physically obeying the invisible magnetic tracks laid down by the Earth's subterranean power grid.
The object isn't choosing to turn. It's being forced to turn by the underlying geology's influence on the local electromagnetic environment.
That makes the whole concept even more mind-blowing somehow. It's elegant. Okay, let's ground this theory. Let's talk physical evidence. The moment the theory literally hits the dirt, the famous Dalnegorsk mystery Height 611 incident.
Ah, yes, Dalnegorsk. This event is absolutely critical because it's cited as a clear case of an anomalous object relaxation event. That's their term for when one of these luminous objects comes down, interacts violently with the surface, leaves traces, and then dissipates or vanishes.
And this one was heavily scrutinized, right? Because it happened relatively near places that launch rockets.
Exactly. There was potential confusion with technogenic sources like space debris, or maybe rocket launches from the Plesets Cosmodrome, which isn't insanely far away. So ruling that out was key.
But they did rule out the rocket theory. Decisively. How?
Based on eyewitness accounts and the object's observed behavior before impact, it demonstrated distinct observable maneuvering. Specifically, it made a steep descent angle and reportedly made short stops or hovered briefly over nearby mountain ridges before heading towards the impact site.
Short stops again. That's completely inconsistent with falling debris or a normal atmospheric trajectory.
Utterly inconsistent. Witnesses described it as this reddish, luminous sphere that eventually seemed to impact or dissipate very close to the ground on that hillside.
Okay, so the behavior ruled out rockets, but the really chilling part, the scientifically crucial part, is the physical trace evidence they found at the site afterwards.
Yes. The site showed unambiguous evidence of a very intense, very localized energy interaction. The primary evidence was thermal. The rock surface, soil, and even some burnt tree stumps in a small area were clearly affected by intense heat exposure.
How hot are we talking?
Their thermophysical analysis, looking at the changes in the minerals and melting points, suggested temperatures reached an astonishing 1,000 to 1,200 degrees Celsius, maybe even higher, right at the point of contact.
Whoa! That's incredibly hot. But wait, you said these are cold plasma balls? How does a cold plasma ball cause 1,200 degrees of heat damage?
Excellent point. Remember the non-equilibrium. The bulk of the plasma, the neutral particles, might be near room temperature for stability. But the electrons are still incredibly hot, highly energized, and the boundary layer, the surface of the plasmoid, where those high-energy electrons are interacting directly with the solid matter of the rock and soil, that can be incredibly destructive and release a huge amount of thermal energy very quickly upon contact or relaxation.
Ah, okay, so the cool core allows it to last, but the energetic surface delivers the punch when it hits something. The rock itself was physically altered.
Yes. Melted in places, chemically changed, suggesting a really rapid, intense thermal burst in a very localized zone.
Okay, so intense, localized heat. Check. That proves a high-energy event happened there. But the magnetic traces, that's where this theory really gets specific, right? What did they find magnetically?
This is fascinating. Analysis of soil and rock samples from the immediate impact zone showed a significant increase in magnetic susceptibility compared to samples taken just a few meters away. And there was a distinct change in the pattern of the rock's natural remnant magnetization.
So the object left a magnetic signature. How did the scientists interpret that specific magnetic footprint?
They interpreted this combination of thermal and magnetic traces as evidence that the interaction wasn't caused by just, say, a hot object hitting the ground. It was caused by a highly organized energetic structure, which they actually labeled a magnetic bubble.
A magnetic bubble. Okay, that sounds like sci-fi, but are there measurable parameters for this proposed bubble?
They estimated them, yes. Based on the magnetic effects on the rocks, they calculated the minimum magnetic field strength within this impacting bubble structure had to be incredibly high, somewhere in the range of 103 to 104 amperes per meter. That's a very strong field.
And did they estimate its size?
Yeah. Based on the localized area of the effects, they figured the physical size of the impacting structure of the bubble was quite specific, around 1 to 1.5 meters in diameter.
Okay, so not a giant mothership, but a meter-sized ball of intense magnetic energy hitting the ground. This magnetic footprint. It's like the physical signature, the fingerprint of the cold plasma structure itself.
Exactly. It argues strongly against it being just random debris. It points towards a contained, high-energy electromagnetic packet that briefly interacted with the Earth before dissipating.
It literally moves the conversation away from just eyewitness stories and into forensic geophysics, analyzing the crime scene left by the phenomenon. Wow. And then on top of visible objects and ground traces, there are the invisible things, the unseen infrared sources.
Right, this refers to some really interesting photographic documentation, again from the Altai region, specifically around Belukha Mountain. Using specialized film or techniques, perhaps sensitive to infrared, they captured images showing sources of light or energy that were totally invisible to the naked eye at the same time.
So Energy is venting from these EAZs, but not always in the visible spectrum. Sometimes it's silent, invisible heat, or infrared radiation.
That's what it suggests, that the vertical energy transfer happening in these tectonically stressed zones is a really complex, multi-component process. Sometimes it makes a visible plasmoid, sometimes maybe just an infrared burst.
If these were interpreted as non-thermal infrared spots, maybe related to something called the Herschel effect on the film, which is sensitivity to non-visible radiation, did they estimate the power involved?
They did, and the numbers are just staggering. To generate those invisible infrared signatures, the estimated power output of the underlying energy source had to be enormous. The range they calculated was anywhere from 10 million watts, 107 W, up to 100 billion watts, 1011 W.
100 billion watts. That is the output of a large conventional power station, just silently venting energy invisibly from deep fault lines in the Earth.
That's the implication of those readings. It really reinforces the idea that these EAZs aren't just passive cracks in the ground. They are functioning as colossal planetary energy release points or generators.
Okay, the scale is just becoming almost unbelievable. Let's shift back to the lab for a moment. Can we actually make these things, these stable plasmoids, under controlled conditions?
Well, that's the beauty of this whole framework, isn't it? It's potentially testable. The core idea that water vapor stabilizes long-lived plasma isn't just a wild guess. It's something researchers have actively tried to replicate in laboratory settings, specifically trying to create analogs for ball lightning, which shares many characteristics with these reported UAP plasmoids.
Right. Ball lightning is often considered the closest known phenomenon. So tell us about the lab successes. How do you cook up a miniature UAP on a lab bench?
One of the most famous and often cited sets of experiments comes from Japanese researchers Otsuki and Ofuruto. They used a different method, stationary microwave discharge, basically zapping air inside a special box, a resonant cavity with powerful microwaves until it ionizes and forms plasma.
Like a very, very souped-up microwave oven creating plasma instead of heating soup. What did they manage to produce?
They successfully created plasmoids that lasted for several seconds. Now, seconds doesn't sound long to us, but in plasma physics, where things usually vanish in microseconds, lasting for whole seconds is an eternity. It proves significant stability.
Okay, longevity. Check. Did they behave like the reported objects?
Yes. Critically, they observed these microwave-generated plasmoids moving around inside the resonant cavity. They weren't just static blobs. They maintained their shape and coherence while moving. And sometimes, fascinatingly, they even observed them splitting into two distinct stable domains, or smaller plasmoids.
Movement and splitting, that's huge. Because eyewitnesses frequently report large objects seeming to divide into smaller ones or eject smaller spheres. They replicated that in the lab.
They observed splitting phenomena, yes. Furthermore, in one variation, they managed to get a plasma flame, or blob, to actually exit through a small hole they made in the resonator wall. And they saw it persist, out in the open air, for 1 to 2 seconds after they completely shut off the magnetron, the microwave power source.
Wow, so it survived even after the power was cut. That proves it can self-sustain, at least briefly, thanks to that internal structure and energy balance.
Exactly. It confirms the potential for these non-equilibrium plasma structures to have a life of their own, beyond the initial energy input, which is crucial for explaining objects seen far from any obvious power source.
And did these Japanese lab experiments also find the humidity connection? Was water vapor critical for them too?
It seems to be a universal requirement for stability. While the microwave method is different from the HF discharge, complementary studies in Japan looking at actual natural ball lightning sightings found an overwhelming correlation. 89.7% of reliably documented ball lightning sightings occurred during weather conditions clear or cloudy, not necessarily raining when the relative humidity was measured to be above 80%.
80%. That's maybe not the super extreme 95-98% needed for maximum stability in the Russian model, but it's still very high humidity. It strongly reinforces the critical role of atmospheric moisture.
Absolutely. It ties the lab work back to real-world observations. It consistently points to the fact that these aren't just generic electrical discharges happening randomly. They are highly specific water-stabilized plasma structures that seem to require that narrow, humid atmospheric window to form and persist for any length of time.
Okay, it really feels like a cohesive, scientifically robust model. It connects the deep geology, the atmospheric physics, the plasma physics. But the original authors, the Russian geophysicists, they were honest scientists. They acknowledged that the full picture wasn't completely nailed down, right? What did they see as the key remaining challenges, the unanswered questions?
The main challenge they highlighted really boils down to synthesis and timing. It's incredibly difficult science. They admitted that the exact, complex chain of processes that efficiently converts the raw mechanical stress energy deep in the lithosphere into a stable, structured, highly charged cold plasma packet that then gets ejected. That whole transition remains incredibly difficult to capture, to model accurately, and especially to predict.
Because it happens fast, it's non-periodic, and it involves bridging completely different scientific fields that don't usually talk to each other enough.
Precisely. You need to bring together hardcore geology, understanding the deep fault mechanics and rock properties. You need geophysics mapping the complex electrical and magnetic fields generated. And you need cutting-edge plasma physics, modeling the microphysics of the cold plasma stabilization, the water interaction, the internal fields. Getting all those experts and data types synthesized is a huge hurdle.
And the events themselves are fleeting.
Exactly. The sheer speed and immense energy density involved mean that getting good, real-time observational data during an event is incredibly rare and difficult. Most analysis is retrospective, based on eyewitnesses or the traces left behind, like at Dalnegorsk. So this seminal work, this Russian research, it essentially lays down the theoretical foundation for that grand synthesis. It's a call to action, demanding that future research has to stop compartmentalizing these phenomena as just weird anomalies.
And start viewing them as unified, high-energy planetary mechanics in action.
That's the paradigm shift that we're pushing for.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. What does this all mean for you, listening right now? You came here for a deep dive on UAPs, maybe expecting aliens or secret government tech, and instead we've delivered this incredibly detailed, cohesive, physical, and entirely terrestrial model that could potentially explain many, if not most, of the world's most spectacular and baffling anomalous light phenomena.
The core takeaway is this. According to this framework, these things are likely not extraterrestrial craft. They are a direct, powerful, and utterly natural result of our planet's own mechanics.
Deep tectonic faults, these energy-active zones, or EAZs, act like colossal underground electrical generator.
They vent highly specialized, water-stabilized, cold plasma, packets these plasmoids up into the atmosphere under very specific humid conditions.
And these objects appear to maneuver not because they have pilots or AI,
but because they're physically locked onto and guided by the intense, complex magnetic field lines associated with those deep geological fault structures beneath them. Their impossible turns are just them following the Earth's invisible tracks.
It completely shifts the focus of the entire debate, away from astronomy and ufology, and squarely into the realm of geophysics and atmospheric plasma physics, which leaves us with a truly provocative final thought to chew on.
If the Earth is actively discharging these massive amounts of untapped, highly concentrated energy, potentially up to 100 billion watts, remember, from these specific mappable energy-active zones.
Zones linked to known fault lines, zones we could potentially monitor much more closely. What should we be doing with that knowledge? Should we be focusing geological efforts on using these energy discharges, these precursor lights maybe, to better predict seismic stress and earthquakes?
Or should we be looking beyond prediction? Should we be investigating methods to actually monitor, maybe even safely tap into and harvest this enormous, apparently clean, untapped geopolitical power source that's constantly being generated right beneath our feet?
If the Earth really is this giant, dynamic, self-recharging battery, maybe the biggest discovery waiting for us isn't who might be visiting from the stars,
but understanding, respecting, and maybe even utilizing the tremendous ignored power source we've been living on top of all along.